on his face, and when he sat down, he just stared at me. And he said, "Can I be honest with you?" And I said, "No."
The lights fade, the camera stops rolling, and somewhere between fame and silence, a man who once moved the world quietly disappears. He wasn't the kind of star you forget. Standing 6'5", with a voice deep enough to calm a storm, Michael Clarke Duncan didn't just play powerful men, he embodied grace. In The Green Mile, he became the soul of an era, the gentle giant who made millions believe in kindness again. But fame has its own rhythm applause, then echo. Behind that smile lived struggle, loyalty, and a mystery that would outlast his years. So how does a man so full of life end up surrounded by unanswered questions? Let's get into his story right now. Let me know where you're watching this from. Grab a warm drink, and let's begin. Long before the red carpets and studio lights, there was a boy growing up in the heart of Chicago's South Side, a place where dreams often ended before they began. His name was Michael Clarke Duncan, born on the 10th of December 1957 in the Robert Taylor Homes housing projects. The walls were thin, the nights were long, and survival was its own kind of education. His mother, Jean Duncan, was the quiet strength of that home. A single parent who cleaned buildings and offices for nearly 18 hours a day, she kept her children fed and safe while holding the world at bay. Michael's father, a railroad worker, had walked out when he was just 6 years old. Watching his mother struggle alone left an imprint that would shape the rest of his life. He once said that seeing the way his father treated her made him promise never to drink or smoke a day in his life. Jean was protective, fiercely so. She didn't want the streets to claim her son, and she knew how easily they could. She pushed him toward education and art, not the rough world outside. When other boys played football under the Friday night lights, Michael sat with his mother reading lines from old plays. She wanted him to act. She told him his voice could move people. By the time he was 12, that voice had deepened into a baritone so rich it startled the neighbors. Still, being different wasn't easy in that neighborhood. His deep voice and calm nature made him a target for teasing. Some kids tried to fight him just to test his size, but his sister Judy, tough, loyal, fearless, always had his back. She could fight, and she made sure everyone knew it. In that small family circle, love meant protection, and protection was love. Chicago, in the 1960 and 1970, was a city of fire and rhythm gospel choirs, jazz bars, and the ever-present pulse of change. But it was also a place divided, where gang violence loomed over the projects like a storm cloud. Once, a basketball coach wanted to visit Michael's neighborhood to recruit new players. Michael had to ride in the car with him just to make sure he'd get back out safely. The danger wasn't exaggerated. It was real. Jean didn't tolerate excuses or rebellion. When teenage Michael came home one day and said he wanted to join a gang, she hit him over the head with a frying pan. He laughed about it years later, but the lesson stayed with him. She wasn't raising a statistic, she was raising a survivor. Basketball became his first love. At Kankakee Community College, he was a starting center, strong, fast, unstoppable. For a time, it looked like he might escape poverty through sports, but life, as always, had other plans. When he transferred to Alcorn State University in Mississippi to study communications, coaches urged him to switch to football. They said he could make the NFL in 2 years. His mother said no. She feared he'd get hurt. "You have something better waiting," she told him. It was during those college years that Michael witnessed an event that would become a symbol of racial tension in American pop culture. The 1979 disco demolition night at Chicago's White Sox Stadium. 50,000 people showed up to destroy disco records, but many of the albums thrown weren't disco at all. They were R&B, funk, and soul. Black music, black voices. Michael saw it with his own eyes, a crowd destroying something they didn't understand. That memory stayed with him, a reminder of how easily joy can be turned into anger. Then came the call that changed everything. His mother had fallen ill. Without hesitation, Michael left college to take care of her. He worked long hours digging ditches for a gas company, then spent nights as a bouncer at local clubs. Even in those rough places, people noticed something different about him. He was polite, smiling, always calm, the kind of man who could stop a fight without throwing a punch. He'd quietly put a drunk man in a sleeper hold, set him in a chair, and tell him to rest. The nickname Big Mike started there. But even while working 2 jobs, he never let go of the dream his mother planted. He told his friends he wanted to be an actor. They believed him, and teased him too, calling him Hollywood Mike. When his mother recovered, she told him to go chase that dream. "There's nothing left for you here," she said. So he joined a traveling theater company as a security guard. When the company moved to California, Michael stayed. That single decision to stay behind in a city where no one knew his name would change his life forever. California was not kind at first. He went to 50 auditions and was rejected every time. He almost joined the LAPD out of desperation. But each time he thought about quitting, he remembered his mother's voice. He slept in his car under a bridge for a while, saving every dollar he could. During the day, he worked as security at small clubs. At night, he studied scripts and waited for a chance. It would take years, but that chance would come not in the way he expected, and not when anyone thought it would. He was already in his 40s when Hollywood finally looked his way. But for Michael Clarke Duncan, patience wasn't weakness. It was faith. In Los Angeles, the dream didn't arrive wrapped in gold. It came in the form of long nights, small favors, and endless rejection. Michael Clarke Duncan was a man built for challenges, 6'5", over 300 pounds, a mountain of muscle, but Hollywood wasn't looking for mountains. It was looking for types, and men like him didn't fit the type. So he worked, he guarded doors, watched over stars, and waited. At first, his world was measured in bouncer shifts and security gigs, small paychecks, smaller apartments, but big hope, his kindness stood out. Even in the roughest clubs, he was known for being the guy who broke up fights with a smile. The regulars called him Big Mike. It was meant as a joke, but the name stuck. In the mid-1990, opportunity started to knock, not loudly, but enough to make him listen. A friend from a music label offered him a chance to appear in a rap video. That small cameo led to another. Suddenly, the man who guarded stars was standing next to them. In 1995, he appeared in R. Kelly's Down Low video as one of Mr. Big's bodyguards, then again in Tupac's California Love, a wild, post-apocalyptic ride through a world of dust and sound. He wasn't speaking yet, just standing, towering, and unforgettable. Television soon followed. One-line parts on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Renegade, Married, With Children, and The Bold and the Beautiful Blink, and you might miss him, but he was there. Each small role was a lesson. He studied how actors moved, how the camera found emotion in silence. That same year, he landed his first film appearance, a small part in Ice Cube's Friday. He played one of Debo's friends, standing at the edge of the scene, laughing, watching. It lasted only seconds, but for Michael, it was proof that he belonged. "Every second on that set felt like forever," he later said. Behind the scenes, he was still protecting others. Will Smith hired him as a personal bodyguard. So did Martin Lawrence, Jamie Foxx, LL Cool J, and the notorious B.I.G. It was a dangerous world, especially for a man whose size made him a target. On the night of the 9th of March, 1997, when Biggie was killed in Los Angeles, Michael was supposed to be there. He'd been scheduled to work security that night, but a last-minute request from another guard changed everything. He swapped shifts to protect singer Babyface at a smaller, quieter show. When he got home and turned on the news, the headline hit him like a wave. Biggie was dead. For days, he couldn't speak about it. He knew that if he'd kept his original assignment, he might have been sitting in that car, right beside his friend. It was the moment that made him walk away from security work for good. After that, he focused on acting truly, this time. The late-night clubs became classrooms. He started taking acting lessons, memorizing monologues, auditioning for anything that came his way. Small roles began to appear again. The Jamie Foxx Show, The Wayans Brothers, Living Single. His resume grew, one line at a time. In 1998, a role finally placed him under the same lights as the stars he once guarded. He was cast in Armageddon, a blockbuster led by Bruce Willis, Ben Affleck, and Liv Tyler. It wasn't a leading role, but it changed everything. Michael was now on the biggest set of his life, surrounded by explosions, cameras, and pressure. But for the first time, he wasn't just security. He was part of the story. And in the middle of that chaos, something extraordinary happened. Bruce Willis noticed him. The two shared the same work ethic, the same dry humor, the same loyalty. On breaks, they'd talk about faith, family, and the strange loneliness that comes with fame. Bruce saw something in Michael, not just strength, but gentleness, the kind of presence that can fill a room without raising a voice. That friendship would soon lead to the greatest opportunity of his life, one that would turn a hard-working security guard into an Oscar-nominated actor and a gentleman into a legend. Bruce Willis had a way of recognizing something rare, a quality that couldn't be taught or faked. On the Armageddon set, he saw it in Michael Clarke Duncan. When the cameras stopped rolling, Bruce pulled him aside and asked, "Have you ever read The Green Mile?" Michael hadn't. Bruce told him to buy the book twice, in fact, and read it carefully. "I think there's a part in there only you could play," he said. At first, Michael thought it was just friendly advice, but Bruce was serious. He reached out to director Frank Darabont, who was casting for the film adaptation of Stephen King's novel. The story called for a man who could embody both physical strength and spiritual gentleness, a presence larger than life but filled with compassion. That man was John Coffey. When Michael walked into that first audition, he was nervous, so nervous he cried, not because of fear, but because he wanted it so much. He wanted to make his mother proud, to show that all the years of rejection and labor meant something. Frank Darabont later said Michael's audition was rough at first. His timing was off, his delivery uneven. But when the director spoke to him privately, something shifted. Michael opened up. He stopped acting and started feeling. The tears came naturally, not as performance but as release. He got the role. On set, surrounded by veterans like Tom Hanks, David Morse, and Sam Rockwell, Michael felt like the new kid in class. But Hanks treated him with respect, helping him through long, emotional scenes. The film's crew affectionately called him Big Mike, the same nickname he'd carried from Chicago. And while everyone else went home exhausted, Michael stayed late, rehearsing every line. The Green Mile was released in 1999, a haunting, deeply human story about life, death, and redemption inside a prison's death row. When audiences first saw Michael as John Coffey, many didn't see an actor. They saw something bigger, a man who could hold pain in his eyes and kindness in his hands. The scene where Coffey weeps, "I'm tired, boss," became one of cinema's most unforgettable moments. The film earned 4 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture. Michael Clarke Duncan was nominated for Best Supporting Actor, a first for him, and a moment that seemed almost impossible only a few years before. Critics described his performance as spiritual, heartbreaking, and transcendent. For a man who had once dug ditches to survive, the red carpet at the Oscars felt unreal. He wore a simple tuxedo, smiled shyly, and told reporters, "My mother is watching this right now. I did it for her." But fame brought its own complexities. Some activists criticized the film for portraying a familiar stereotype, the saintly, suffering black man who saves white characters. It was a debate that hurt Michael, though he rarely spoke about it. He loved the role too deeply to defend it with anger. John Coffey was love, he once said, and love doesn't need defending. After The Green Mile, the world saw him differently, no longer just the big guy. He was now a respected actor, a symbol of grace and power combined. Offers poured in comedies, dramas, even superhero films. But behind every success, he kept the same humility. He never forgot the days he'd slept under a bridge, or the promise he'd made to his mother, to stay kind, no matter what. That role changed everything. It gave him fame, respect, and purpose. But it also set a standard so high, nothing that followed would ever quite feel the same. The lights had found him at last, and from that moment on, Hollywood would never forget the name Michael Clarke Duncan. Fame didn't change Michael Clarke Duncan overnight. It crept in slowly through phone calls from studios, letters from fans, and strangers who only wanted a hug, not an autograph. Hollywood had found its new gentle giant, and for a few shining years, his presence lit up every screen he touched. After The Green Mile, Michael's career moved at a pace he could barely keep up with. He starred in The Whole 9 Yards alongside Bruce Willis again, a film that proved he could do comedy as effortlessly as drama. It wasn't just his size that filled the frame anymore, it was his warmth, his timing, his ability to make audiences laugh while never losing their respect. The movie became a box office success, and suddenly, Big Mike was everywhere. By 2001, he was cast in Tim Burton's reimagined Planet of the Apes, a film that pushed him into the world of big-budget spectacle. Under heavy makeup and armor, he played Colonel Attar, fierce, disciplined, commanding. His physical power had finally found a role to match it. Yet beneath the mask, that same quiet humanity came through. He treated extras and crew with the same kindness he showed A-list stars. He never acted like he was above anyone, one crew member said. He made you feel seen. End result. Then came The Scorpion King in 2002, alongside Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. The two became instant friends, two men from different worlds who shared the same discipline and joy for life. On set, Michael's laughter could fill a desert. Between takes, he'd train with the stunt team, help them reset props, or tell stories from his Chicago days. When the movie opened, audiences saw not just muscle and might, but a man who brought heart to every frame. That same year, Michael was cast in Daredevil as Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin. It was a bold move for Hollywood, casting a black actor in a role traditionally played as white. He accepted the challenge, knowing he'd face criticism, but he carried it with grace. To prepare, he gained nearly 40 pounds, training relentlessly and eating heavy meals to fill out the villain's imposing physique. The tabloids whispered rumors of steroids, but Michael dismissed them with a smile. "I've been lifting weights since I could walk," he said. "This is all me." He had finally reached a level most actors only dream of: steady work, international recognition, and a reputation as one of the kindest men in Hollywood. His voice, that deep, resonant baritone, became a calling card. It carried into animation and video games: Brother Bear, Kung Fu Panda, Cats, and Dogs. Children recognized him by sound alone. Through it all, he remained the same man who once read lines with his mother at the kitchen table. He donated to schools in Chicago, volunteered at youth centers, and never turned down a handshake. Reporters often remarked that his smile seemed permanent, as if he carried some private peace the rest of the world couldn't touch. When asked about success, he never talked about fame or money. He said, "Happiness is doing what you love and treating people right. That's all." Oh, those were golden years, steady, humble, full of work and light. Hollywood had embraced him, and for a time, it seemed as if nothing could dim his glow. But fame, as always, comes with shadows waiting quietly in the corner. And for Michael Clarke Duncan, those shadows would soon begin to stir. At the height of his fame, Michael Clarke Duncan seemed untouchable. He had the body of a superhero, the heart of a preacher, and the humility of a man who still remembered the scent of his mother's kitchen back in Chicago. But success, as gentle as it looked from the outside, carried a different weight on the inside. He had become the face of Hollywood's favorite paradox: strength wrapped in tenderness. Every director wanted that combination, the magic that made The Green Mile unforgettable. Yet behind the applause, Michael quietly felt something shift. He began to understand what it meant to be typecast. Every script that arrived on his desk seemed to start the same way: a large man with a soft heart. It was flattering, but limiting. He wanted to play fathers, mentors, ordinary men, not just the giant with a soul. Hollywood, though, rarely let go of an image once it had sold. He smiled through it, grateful for the work. But sometimes, after long interviews, he'd sigh and say, "I don't want to be remembered just for my size." Emberfess. Physically, the strain was catching up. The constant training, the long shoots, the expectations of maintaining his massive frame, it all took its toll. To keep up with the demands of playing Kingpin in Daredevil, he had to eat thousands of calories a day and lift weights heavier than most could imagine. When the film wrapped, he promised himself he'd live differently, lighter, healthier, freer. But the spotlight doesn't always allow rest. He kept moving, kept smiling, even as fatigue began to whisper its warning. There were moments of quiet reflection during this time, glimpses of the man behind the star. He spoke often about faith, about wanting to inspire kids who came from nothing. He said that if his story could make even one person believe in second chances, then everything had been worth it. Still, there were times he looked tired in interviews. The glow that once felt effortless began to dim just slightly, not from unhappiness, but from the weight of maintaining perfection. Then came the health scare that changed everything. During a routine checkup, doctors told him he had sarcoidosis, an inflammatory disease that affects the organs, particularly the lungs and heart. It was the same condition that would later take comedian Bernie Mac. For Michael, it was a wake-up call. He decided to take control of his health immediately. He stopped eating meat, gave up processed food, and became a vegetarian. In a matter of months, he lost nearly 90 pounds. People around him noticed the transformation. He looked happier, one friend said, like he'd finally started taking care of himself instead of the image. He joined PETA People for the ethical treatment of animals and began advocating for kindness toward all living creatures. In interviews, he'd hold up vegetables and say with a grin, "You see this? This is life." It became his quiet mission to live clean, to live grateful, to live long. And yet, there was still something fragile beneath that renewed energy. Hollywood is a machine that rarely slows down, and Michael had spent a lifetime catching up to it. Fame had come late, success had come hard, and he refused to waste a moment. But somewhere in that pursuit, rest never found a place. By the time he met Omarosa Manigault, the outspoken television personality, he was in his early 50s and finally allowing himself to breathe. They met by chance, in the produce aisle of a Whole Foods in Los Angeles. He was buying fruit, she was buying vegetables. Two people from very different worlds, drawn together in a moment that felt ordinary, almost cinematic. Friends said he looked content, not famous, not busy, just human again. He talked about settling down, about slowing the pace. After years of noise and spotlight, he seemed to crave silence. But life, as it always had for Michael Clarke Duncan, was preparing another turn, one he could neither foresee nor control. By the time Michael Clarke Duncan reached his early 50s, he was finally living the kind of life he had always dreamed of, calm, balanced, full of gratitude. But even peace can hide a quiet danger. For years, his body had been his instrument, his armor, and his identity. Yet behind the smile and discipline, something inside him was breaking down. Doctors had already diagnosed him with sarcoidosis, a rare disease that causes inflammation in the body. At first, he managed it with determination, adjusting his diet, becoming a vegetarian, and throwing himself into health and fitness. He even threw away thousands of dollars worth of meat from his refrigerator, laughing as he said, "You can't serve two masters, the body and the habit." And he lost nearly 90 pounds and became a symbol of strength through change. Magazines wrote about his transformation. He joined PETA, proudly speaking about animal rights and clean living. He was glowing, lighter in every sense of the word. But beneath that glow, fatigue often followed him home. He would occasionally faint without warning, once collapsing after a workout. The doctors called it a syncopal episode, a sudden loss of consciousness due to low blood pressure and heart irregularities. To prevent another collapse, they implanted a pacemaker. For most people, that would have been enough to slow down. But Michael never liked the idea of slowing down. He was working on new projects, doing voice acting, mentoring young performers, and spending more time with Omarosa, who had become his fiancée. Friends said he seemed genuinely happy, the kind of contentment that comes when you finally stop chasing and start living. He often talked about building a family, about returning to Chicago to help kids from his old neighborhood. He spoke of writing a book someday, a story about second chances, he said. But the rhythm of his heart had begun to change again. In late 2011 and early 2012, close friends noticed something different. His speech sometimes slurred. He looked tired more often. He brushed it off, saying he was just overworked. Still, those who knew him best sensed something deeper. That Christmas, during a family gathering at his home, Michael's loved ones noticed he wasn't himself. He stumbled as he walked, seemed distant, unfocused. It was unlike him, the man known for his energy, his booming laugh, his love of family. He smiled, said he was fine, and went to his room to rest. It would be the last time most of them saw him alive and well. In the weeks that followed, his condition worsened. On a quiet July night in 2012, while he slept beside Omarosa, he began struggling to breathe. She woke to the sound, called 911, and started CPR. When paramedics arrived, they told her that without her quick action, he would not have survived the night. He was rushed to the hospital and placed in intensive care. For nearly 2 months, he remained there, sometimes awake, sometimes drifting, surrounded by machines that kept his heart steady. Family and friends visited, praying, hoping, remembering the man whose kindness had touched them all. And even in those hospital rooms, his story was not just about illness. It was about a man who had spent a lifetime giving light, now fighting to keep his own. For weeks after that night in July 2012, the world of Michael Clarke Duncan became one long, quiet waiting room. Machines hummed softly, nurses whispered, and his family clung to hope. The man who had once lifted others with his laughter now lay still, surrounded by those who had loved his gentleness most. At first, there were signs of improvement. His eyes opened. He watched television. Friends like Holly Robinson Peete visited and said he was responding. For a moment, everyone believed he would make it. But recovery is not always a straight road. His body, once a symbol of strength, began to fail him. One by one, his organs shut down: kidneys, pancreas, heart. After nearly 2 months in the hospital, the fight was over. On the 3rd of September 2012, Michael Clarke Duncan passed away at the age of 54. The news broke quietly that morning. Across the world, headlines carried his photo smiling, radiant, still full of life. Tom Hanks called him a treasure. Fans left flowers at the Hollywood Walk of Fame, even though he never had a star there. They said he didn't need one. His spirit was enough. But behind the tributes, grief began to divide the people closest to him. As his family mourned, questions surfaced about his final months. In the weeks before his death, Michael had reportedly changed his will, leaving most of his estate to his fiancée, Omarosa Manigault. It was a decision that surprised and hurt some of his relatives, who believed he wasn't in the right condition to make such changes. His sister, Judy Duncan, spoke publicly, saying she didn't understand why their family had been written out. Omarosa, in turn, denied any wrongdoing, saying the will reflected Michael's wishes and that his family's accusations were attempts to profit from his passing. The dispute quickly drew media attention, interviews, statements, rumors. What should have been a time of peace became a storm of suspicion. It was reported that there were other moments of tension: questions about funeral arrangements, about the home in Woodland Hills, about the personal belongings that once filled it. Family members said they were kept away from his house and even from some hospital visits. Omarosa said she was only following medical and legal advice. The truth, as in most human stories, was likely somewhere in between. What remained clear was the pain not of scandal, but of loss. Everyone involved had loved him in their own way, and grief has a way of turning love into confusion. At his funeral, friends and colleagues filled the church with songs and tears. Angie Stone and Kelly Price sang. Jay Leno, Tom Hanks, and Loretta Devine spoke softly about the man who had never lost his kindness, no matter how high he climbed. Stevie Wonder sent a recorded tribute. For all the chaos that surrounded his final days, the service itself felt like a release, a return to peace. Those who came didn't talk about wills or headlines. They talked about the smile that never left his face, the hugs that made strangers feel seen, the quiet strength that made everyone feel safe. And when the last hymn faded, there was silence not of absence, but of gratitude. Hollywood had lost one of its rarest souls. And somewhere beyond the noise of fame and controversy, Michael Clarke Duncan could finally rest. In the years after his passing, the image of Michael Clarke Duncan remained suspended, in time a towering man with a gentle soul, forever walking the green mile between strength and tenderness. Hollywood had lost many stars before him, but few had left behind a presence that felt so human, so familiar, so deeply missed. For American audiences, his name became shorthand for a rare kind of goodness. People didn't talk about him the way they talked about most actors. They talked about how he made them feel. When they rewatched The Green Mile, they cried not just for the character of John Coffey, but for the man behind it, a man who seemed to carry forgiveness in his eyes. Teachers used the film in classrooms to discuss empathy and compassion. Veterans spoke about finding comfort in his performance. Even those who never met him said they felt like they had. In Hollywood, his legacy took root quietly. He had broken barriers in an industry that often limited black actors to stereotypes of either aggression or comedy. Michael brought something else: dignity. He showed that strength and softness could coexist, that a man's power could come from his heart as much as his muscles. It was a shift that opened doors for others who came after him, actors like Dwayne Johnson, Terry Crews, and Idris Elba, who have all cited him as an inspiration. Directors remembered his professionalism. Co-stars remembered his humility. Behind the camera, he was known for arriving early, shaking every crew member's hand and learning the names of lighting assistants and extras. He made you feel like the most important person on set, one producer recalled. For many African-American performers, Michael Clarke Duncan became proof that it wasn't too late to dream. He was 42 when Hollywood finally noticed him an age when most actors are already being forgotten. His story resonated deeply with anyone who had ever been told that their time had passed. "He showed us that it's never too late to be seen," said a fan during an online tribute. Globally, his reach extended beyond Hollywood. In Europe, The Green Mile remains one of the most re-watched films of the late 20th century. In Asia, his voice roles in animated hits like Kung Fu Panda and Brother Bear made him beloved by children who never even knew his face. Across cultures, he represented something universal: compassion wrapped in strength, faith wrapped in humility. After his death, PETA honored him with a posthumous tribute, thanking him for his advocacy and his gentle example of living with purpose. His decision to give up meat not out of vanity, but out of empathy inspired many to think differently about health and kindness. But perhaps his greatest legacy lies not in awards or box office numbers, but in memory. Those who worked with him still tell stories. How he laughed so loudly you could hear it from another room. How he prayed before every meal on set. How he never forgot to call his mother no matter where he was in the world. He wasn't just remembered as a great actor. He was remembered as a good man. And in a city built on illusion, that may be the rarest legacy of all. Time has a way of revealing what truly matters. For Michael Clarke Duncan, the years following his passing have only deepened the appreciation for what he gave not just to film, but to the idea of decency itself. In America, retrospectives and documentaries began revisiting his story, not as a tale of tragedy, but as a meditation on perseverance. Critics who once dismissed The Green Mile as sentimental began to see its deeper resonance. They acknowledged that Duncan's portrayal of John Coffey was not a stereotype, but a performance of extraordinary humanity. He had given life to a character who represented innocence in a world too cynical to recognize it. "He played grace," one writer said, "and in doing so, he reminded us what grace actually looks like." You could feel his absence at every award show, every charity gala, every reunion of actors who had once shared the screen with him. Tom Hanks spoke about him often, describing him as a man who lived like he knew every day was a blessing. Dwayne Johnson still refers to him as a brother. Even years later, when The Rock posts throwback photos of them laughing on set, the comments fill with hearts and messages from fans around the world. We miss him. We still feel his light. For Hollywood, his death became a quiet lesson in humility, a reminder that the greatest stars aren't always the loudest. In an industry known for ego, Michael's kindness became his legend. His name is now mentioned in acting schools as an example of authenticity proof that true emotion doesn't come from pretending, but from living with empathy. Outside of America, audiences in Europe and Asia continue to hold his work close. In France, La Ligne Verte, The Green Mile, is shown annually on television, still ranking among the country's most beloved American films. In Japan, his voice in Kung Fu Panda is considered iconic, a sound of strength and humor blended perfectly. On social media, fan pages dedicated to him remain active, sharing quotes, interviews, and scenes that have long outlived their moment. Yet even with all the admiration, there is a quiet sadness that lingers, a sense that Hollywood never fully celebrated him while he was here. Awards came, but not enough. Roles arrived, but too late. It's a pattern many artists of color know too well, to be recognized only after they're gone. Still, Michael never chased acknowledgement. He used to say, "You don't need everyone to know your name, just enough people to remember your heart." Today, his story resonates even more with audiences who feel unseen or underestimated. His life stands as a testament to second chances, proof that it's never too late to be great, and that humility outlasts fame. In classrooms, in fan forums, in film discussions, people continue to return to the same truth. Michael Clarke Duncan made the world softer simply by being himself, and perhaps that is the most profound reflection of all, that long after the lights fade and the applause dies down, what remains is not the performance, but the person, the one who smiled at everyone on set, the one who never turned away from kindness. The world may have moved on, But the warmth he left behind still glows quietly in film reels, in memories, in the spaces between silence and remembrance. The lights have long faded from the sets where Michael Clarke Duncan once stood, but somehow his presence still lingers in the echo of his laughter, in the kindness people recall when they say his name. He was never Hollywood's loudest star, but perhaps that was the point. His power came from silence, from stillness, from the way he made a scene feel sacred. Even now, when The Green Mile plays late at night on television, audiences pause. They remember the man who carried pain and peace in the same breath, the man who showed that gentleness could be the greatest kind of strength. Michael's story is not just about fame, it's about timing, faith, and the courage to keep believing when the world says you're too late. He started where hope seemed impossible, a boy from Chicago's South Side, raised by a single mother who refused to let him fall. And when his moment finally came, he used it not to rise above others, but to lift them up with him. That's the legacy that endures, not the awards, not the red carpets, but the love he left behind. His smile, his generosity, his belief that every person deserved respect. In a city that so often forgets, he remembered everyone. Maybe that's why people still talk about him, still write about him, still feel him in the stories that move them. Because Michael Clarke Duncan wasn't just acting, he was living proof that goodness can survive success. And so, as we close this story, we return to the image that began it, the lights fading, the camera silent, a gentle giant walking out of frame. But his story doesn't end there, because legends don't vanish. They remain in the spaces they once filled, in the films, in the memories, in the hearts that refuse to forget. Do you think Hollywood ever gave him the respect he truly deserved? If this story touched you, subscribe and help keep his light alive. Leave a comment, tell us where you first saw him or what moment from his work stayed with you. Because remembering isn't just nostalgia, it's gratitude. And as long as we remember, Michael Clarke Duncan still walks among us, one quiet step at a time. Some stars never fade, they just shine where fewer eyes can see.